This is the Ag Queen Podcast. This podcast explores the agriculture industry with the movers and shakers of those shaping it. Here's your host, Lori Boyer.
My guest on the show today is Dave Katz, who is the founder of Zyr Vodka, and I'm looking forward to talking with you more about not only the product, but your story. To get us started today, Dave, tell us more about yourself and your background.
Yeah, I've been making and promoting and marketing and drinking Zyr Vodka for 25 years and following a passion first for ice hockey and then for Russia, which brought me to Russia. I lived there for 5 years in Moscow. Well, first as a student over the summer in my sophomore year, and then moved there thinking I'd be back in 3 months. Ended up staying for 5 years. So I got bit by the Russia bug, which inevitably leads to a vodka bug, and then ended up creating a brand, which I called Zyr.
So walk me through that. I mean, how did that idea even come about, and how'd you get started?
Great question. And it's so long ago. I would say in short, I've always loved brands. And that's what I did professionally in Russia. But while you're there, that's all you do is vodka. It's not flavored vodka. It's not cocktails. It's shots. It's generally with food. It's always with friends, or not always, but certainly with me. And meanwhile, I'd come back to the States almost monthly, and I would learn. This is 96, 97, with the introduction of some bigger brands, the Grey Gooses, Skies, Kettle Ones, Belvedere. And I said, where are the Russians? You know, it's like everything. Holland always struck me as odd. Like there was Vox, there was Kettle One, there was Van Gogh vodka. I said, where are the Russians of the smoother, better packaged, pronounceable brands? And so at the end of my stint, I moved back to the States in right at the millennium. And I said, I'm going to give it a go, and kept going back and forth 2000, 2001, looking for brands that existed at first. And they were just they didn't really exist for what I wanted, to be honest. It was loaded with things. Glycerin and lactic acid there was actually on the back of the bottle. And then the names were unpronounceable. Preobrazhenskaya vodka is not going to sell here. And I felt they weren't smooth enough. All these new brands coming from Europe predominantly were lighter. Americans wanted smooth, and that's not just for vodka, whether it's single malts or light beer or Pinot Noir. It was like, give me smooth. Maybe not so much with the whiskeys. They want to burn and a bite there, but even tequilas now, it's, they just want watery. I ended up creating my own brand.
And you're based in Illinois, is that right?
We make Zyr there. That's the farm and the distillery. I'm based in Miami now for the last 20 years. Originally a Jersey boy.
The farm and the distillery are in what part of Illinois?
The farm is about an hour or so south of Chicago, called Janie's Mill. Fabulous story, fabulous people. I'll talk about that in a second. And then another hour or so to Peoria, Illinois, is where the distillery is, called Black Band.
Now, is there any particular reason why Illinois? Is it a better state for producing potatoes? I'm assuming we're talking potatoes.
We are not talking potatoes. Great question, though. And most people say potatoes, and I'm convinced it's an old James Bond film that has everyone asking potatoes. But in Russia, they don't touch potatoes. There's 1,000 brands and 240 distilleries. None come from potatoes. And in America, it's almost predominantly corn, which is very cheap and heavily subsidized. And but wheat is the big one. So wheat is the Grey Goose, Kettle One, Sky, Svet, Zyr, Russian Stand. It's got a little more flavor to it. And what I use is winter wheat. Absolute is wheat. Stoli is wheat. So wheat's really the big one. The potato is probably Chopin is probably the only one you've ever heard of. Grand Teton Glacier is a nice potato vodka out of America. Why am I plugging another vodka? I don't know. I'll call it as I say it.
Well, that makes more sense then. So you're in the Midwest, you're in Illinois, where we have a whole lot of corn and a lot of wheat in that area.
Yeah. And so what I had done in Russia in the first year or two was I went first to the rectifiers, the distilleries, and said, hey, this is what I'm looking for. Literally brought with me the competition. And they said, all right, if you want that kind of flavor and that texture, you got to go to the farmer. So I went to the next stage, And they said, okay, if you want that, this is the type of wheat or rye. It's always been a blend of winter wheat and rye. And that was something I couldn't do in America a very long time ago. There were just very few distilleries. There were no organic farms 25 years ago, to my knowledge. Janie's Mill converted about 13 years ago, I believe. A beautiful, very sad story, though. His daughter passed, and apparently that was her dream. So in her honor, they converted, and then, of course, named it Janie's Farm and Janie's Mill. But Harold Wilkins and now his son, I was with him about 2 weeks ago at the harvest. Beautiful operation and wonderful flour and people. So,
And all organic.
yeah, certified organic. And that was probably what I'm sorry, I didn't really answer your question. Why Illinois? When I originally started, this is right after Russia invaded the Ukraine. I said, all right, the consumer wants the whole story. So let's try and recreate it, really farm to bottle, farm to shelf. And my wife's family has had a farm in the family for over 100 years in Fremont, Ohio. And I said, how cool would it be if my own uncle, my wife's uncle, would provide the product? Now, it wasn't organic, and it wasn't nearly enough of what we needed, and it was only the wheat. So I spent a lot of time up there. They finally introduced me to MOSA, the organic organization that's certified, and MOSA introduced me to Black Band, and they said, you really should come to Chris Ober and Black Band, who wonderful people, beautiful facility in Peoria. And it was only after I landed the first day on the plane to meet Black Band and Chris Ober that he said, Peoria is Whiskey City. This is where more whiskey was made in the city of Peoria than the entire state of Kentucky up until the start of Prohibition. I was like, well, that's a great story. I want to tell that story. So we're part of the revival of distilled spirits in Peoria. I'm very proud of it. And Chris Ober and Black Band are really leading that charge of the distilling, heritage in Peoria.
I did not know that. So I've just learned a whole lot from you in a short amount of time.
Okay.
Well, I'm curious. We have been talking about this for a little while now. The Russia-Ukraine war. How is that affecting what you're doing with Zyr?
That is, I was caught up in it on many levels. I'm a Russophile. I've studied it. I know, thousands and thousands of people, and I feel terribly for the whole situation. So, like, personally, it's crushing. But business-wise, I'm out of business. And why is that? They invaded on February 22nd of 22. And if you recall, prior to that, even back to October or September of 21, they had amassed 100,000 troops on the border. And so I'm up almost all night. This is bad. This is going to be terrible. Like, and of course it did turn out that way. So as soon as they invaded, despite being American owned and a little bit of British, and I think I'm 1/3 of 1% is my roommate from college who's Swedish with an American green card, we were canceled almost instantly. We were poured off. We were on the news. CNN's calling for comments that this state, in fact, the state of North Carolina banned Russian vodka, and I might sell 10 cases there a year, but it was the cover photo. We formally, I'm like, hold on a second. So we were banned, but March 10th of 22, America officially banned the importation of Russian vodka. So I had about 2 weeks to cry, and then it was, okay, we're out of business. You cannot import if it's not on the water, you can't import it. And I had about 5 containers sitting in St. Petersburg, Russia, and those people do not want this war. And I said, look, really truly canceled. So I said, look, the only people this can affect, because I can never buy anymore, it's banned. So by taking it off the shelf or pouring it out, you're literally only hurting my little family and my sales reps. And so it was eye-opening but I'd probably do the same thing. I probably would have, I'm not going to support Russia. Who knew it was American, owned and made and really an American dream come true. So huge effect, kind of existential threat. We're out of business. So I said, if we're going to try, and we have a nice following, I've been doing this for 20 years. That was my 20th anniversary. You can make it maybe in Poland and maybe have the recipe in some other place. You know what? If it's going to work, I'd like to try in America. And I couldn't do this 20 years ago. They, as mentioned, no distilleries. There really weren't the farms. It's just the mass, the Conagra or Archer Daniels Midland that would, mass produce ethanol. And so I said, let's give it a shot. And and I'm so glad I did.
Is that the reason you decide to go ahead and produce it in America, is because of that war?
Yeah, exactly. It would never have I didn't think I could make
Huh.
Zyr any better, to be honest. Truthfully, it won every review in the country. It's 100 points in the Wine Enthusiast. It is really a beautiful, stunning product, and I didn't think America could make it. I didn't think I could make it elsewhere. So
Had the war not occurred, do you think you would still be making it in Russia?
100%. And it's funny now, if the war
Huh.
ends, I'd never go back. I think it's so much just a great source of pride. The consumer, it was difficult for the last 10 years. What a beautiful bottle, great product. Russian, why not support America? And I think other vodkas, Tito's in particular, paved the way that you can make good stuff here. Whereas prior to that, the 80s, it was Absolute and Stoli. The 90s, it was Grey Goose and Belvedere. Like America can't make good vodka. So I
Interesting.
love the fact that we can do it and we're doing it. So now why go back? The unique selling
Huh.
point of Russia, just for me to get my fill of borscht and mayonnaise-based potato salads. I'll still go personally if when the war ends, and it will end, hopefully, please.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're American through and through.
I know right now, a big thing is people want the stories. And you even alluded to this. People want to know where their food comes from, where their drink comes from, really into the craft side of things, because they want to know the farmers that are behind it. So talk to me about your process for farm to shelf.
I believe it's one of the few, if not the only, vodkas out there, to my knowledge. Most are buying this kind of corn ethanol, or GNS, it's called, and they're running it through their still, and they say we made it here. And I say that in quotes. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, and so many make beautiful product. To me, it's kind of like making pizza. The guy isn't necessarily the flour, and he's not boiling down the sauce. He's opening the can, and it's still an art. So I do respect that. But we truly are Janie's Mill, where he grows organic winter wheat and rye, among other things. And he then loads a truck of 43,000 pounds and drives it a couple hours to Black Band. Chris at Black Band mills it, and he has the silo right outside the distillery. And so he's doing it all right there at Black Band. He's fermenting it and cooking it and distilling it and filtering it and putting it in a bottle. We've never added anything, and we still don't. So many, many, many brands are adding things legally. You can, sugars and glycerins and lactic acids. But I believe not just with vodka, but all distilled spirits, people want additive free. So I said, let's try it. And can we pull it off? And I wanted organic. I wanted additive free. I wanted gluten-free certified, although that's an interesting one because the FDA ruled that all distilled spirits are gluten-free, in fact, because the sugar and thus the gluten all are processed during the distillation. The protein of gluten can't travel in the vapor and turn back into a liquid. So they're all deemed certified gluten-free. But I paid the $500 to prove that. And yeah, we very proudly, an American organic brand.
Do you do all the bottling and labeling there too?
Sure do. That was a bit of a nightmare because we never had a paper label prior. It was always decorated or painted on. And so we hired a beautiful designer called Stranger and Stranger out of New York and I think London and San Francisco. Really fun bottles if you're ever bored, strangerandstranger.com. And they proposed this, something similar to the current look, which is quite different from the Russian, for my 20th anniversary. During the pandemic, I couldn't spend money. You go to bars, they're closed. You do events and charity fundraisers. Well, there were none. So I said, let's look to do a 20th anniversary refresh. And they sent it over. And man, it was not a refresh. It was a rebrand. So, and I loved it. But anyway, as soon as Putin invaded, I was like, hold on a second. We're going to go with that. So I'm super grateful for that part of our collective, Stranger and Stranger. But we never had a paper label. So Chris and I ended up going to LaPorte, Indiana, I believe, to look at machines. As it's an odd shape, it's an oval shape, and it's tapered. It's a nightmare to put a label within a 1.5 millimeter on either side. So, long story short, we bought a machine from Indiana, made right in the States that labels about 27 bottles a minute. Because without it, Chris is like, we just can't help you. Like, there is no way. He gets people show up and then they quit, 2 hours later. So thankfully, we got still plenty of people on the line and employing lots of people in at Black Band Distillery.
Is Zyr Vodka sold all over the U.S.?
Yeah, we've got about 30 states. The important ones, well, I don't know, the big ones, I should say. I guess when you look at the list of the top 30 or 40 vodka markets, we're in just about all of them. But Washington State and California and Arizona, Colorado. The best distribution is really the Florida, New Jersey, New York, Georgia's a big state for us. Minnesota, Wisconsin. Not in Illinois, though. It's the only place in Illinois you've got to go to the distillery to buy it because I don't have a distributor just yet. It's crazy.
Interesting. Yeah. Huh. Let's see here. What else do we need to know? You talked about how clean it is, full transparency. It's a collective. We just talked about all the different processes that you go through.
Yeah, and we have that on the bottle where at the times, like, how do we position it a little differently than the other brands? And I think at the time you had that P. Diddy or Puff Daddy with his Ciroc vodka, and you had Tito as a one-man show, and you had a lot of brands. It's always there's one, George Clooney is the face of a tequila brand. And I said, you know what, there are so many people that made this happen or make it happen, particularly when I converted. I remember I called a number of little distilleries, and finally I said, you know what, I'm going to ask the equipment people. And I went to Vendome in Kentucky. Rob Sherman couldn't have been a nicer guy, and said, you know, if you want to go to school. So I went to Moonshine University in Kentucky, and they introduced me to the yeast people and the enzyme people, Lalaman, and they introduced me to the Scott Industries, the filter people. And I sat up for a week in Napa Valley filtering a quarter of it, a third of it at this speed, at different filter rods. And man, everyone was working as a beautiful team to replicate what we did in Russia. And so we're most certainly a collective. It says it on the bottle. Zyr is a collective, and it's never one person, right? It's not me, and it's not Chris Ober, even the distiller, but it takes so many dozens of people. And then you have my whole sales team and my reps. So we love highlighting the fact that it takes a nation.
David, what are some goals that you have for Zyr Vodka or your company in general?
We got a long way to go. I need some distribution, distributors like Illinois. We got to get the word out. Every time we tell it at events and tastings in liquor stores, they're like, that is a great story and a phenomenal product. So definitely we need a focus. Now that we're kind of done surviving, we need some sizes, we need some distribution, and we need a whole lot of marketing and getting the word out. And we filmed a virtual distillery tour, which it will be up in a few weeks. So you can see the farm, you can see the harvest, and in a VR world, if you're familiar with that headset, it's incredible. And then we went to the distillery and we finished with a drink. So I want to tell this story of the farm and the distillery and Zyr, and hopefully doing the taste test how America 1, Russia 0. And no offense to Russia, I love them. I think we're doing it even better, and she came out amazing. And if anyone's looking, we linked up with a group of stores around the country on my site, zyrvodka.com. So you can actually just buy it right from the site, and it's pretty reasonable.
And just a note here, Zyr Vodka is spelled Z-Y-R. Thank you so much for joining me today. What a great show. Very interesting and very fun to do this show with you today. Dave Katz, founder of Zyr Vodka, my guest on today's show.
Thanks for tuning in to this edition of the Ag Queen Podcast with your host, Lori Boyer.